Welcome to Lawyers Who Care, the video show podcast that highlights attorneys who go above and beyond for their clients. And on each episode, we will meet a new lawyer and they will share stories of when they went beyond legal counsel for the benefit of their client. My name is Andrew Samalin. I'm the principal of Samalin Wealth, a nationally recognized wealth management firm for lawyers, their firms, and their clients. And let's applaud lawyers who care and learn from them. Today, my guest is Jennifer Jarvis. She is a partner at Sartain Law Offices in Gainesville, Georgia. And Jennifer focuses her practice on Social Security disability, short and long-term disability, and estate planning with regard to disability benefits. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me.
So, Jennifer, tell us about what brought you to the law.
So the law for me is actually a second career. As a child, being a lawyer was never on my radar. I come from a family of scientists. We have tons of PhDs, but no lawyers. And so, I was always very science-minded. I have an undergrad and a master's degree in science. And I actually ended up becoming a high school science teacher and taught all the advanced sciences, biology, organic chemistry, and so on, but got really disillusioned with being a teacher. I love to teach and I love imparting, wisdom and things to people, but I hated the process of actually being a teacher. And that's the classroom part of it, the administrators, No Child Left Behind, all of those things. And so I started looking around for something else that I could do. And a big part of that is that call to service. And I think people who feel that, so I'm thinking nurses, teachers, firefighters, they want to help people. And I realized that being an attorney was a way that I could actually help people. And so that's why it kind of is a second career, but in some ways I still feel like I'm doing the same thing, which is teaching and educating and advocating.
And so, of all the fields of law that one can go into, disability is your focus. What brought you to that?
So the law firm that I joined right after law school was basically split 50% workers' compensation from the claimant side, so from the injured worker side, and about 50% on the Social Security side of things. And I did the same split when I originally started. I very quickly grew disillusioned with litigation. I just don't like it. I would rather us come to the table and see if we can work on something. And I started to do a lot more disability. And in the process of that, I started being handed a lot of child cases because I was the person who was the teacher. And so I knew how to read IEPs. I knew the lingo. I knew how to interpret, test scores. And so I started doing a lot of child disability advocating as well. And in the process of doing that, both for adults and children, but especially on the children's side of things, I would sit across the table from families who had disabled children. And I would say, by the way, have you ever thought about what might happen for you or your family if something happens to your child? And they would a lot of times deer in headlights and be like, no, it's like a whole thing. And so we would talk about, well, you need to also get plans in place. And that's how I ended up kind of doing the estate planning, is because I would, like a broken record, say to people, you need an estate attorney, you need an estate attorney. And finally I was like, well, maybe that should just be me. And so I started doing estate planning also for families with children and or adults that have special needs, because it navigates nicely with the Social Security and the Medicaid and the Medicare, which can be very complicated for families. And so being able to do both of those and to have an understanding of those systems is, again, another way that I can really help people and advocate for families.
Are those laws largely at the federal level or at the state level? And how much does a practitioner in Georgia differ from one in Wyoming or New York or Florida?
So there are a lot of similarities, I would say, on the Social Security side. That is a federal program. And so the rules are going to be the same. If you're applying for disability, what are the standards that you have to meet? Those rules are the same across the country. Now, judges are different. Judges in Georgia, Social Security judges in Georgia, are going to be different than those in Wyoming and different than those in California. And so I would say that I think it's better to see somebody who's familiar with the judges in your area. They've all got quirks. And so it's better to have somebody who knows what's going on. From the estate planning side of it, estate planning, of course, is a state matter. Everybody goes to their state laws, but there are a lot of similarities between different states. But from an estate planning point of view, I can only obviously do that for Georgia, whereas on the Social Security side of things, I could actually represent somebody across the country because that's contained within the executive branch of the government.
Mhm. So Jennifer, this huge cloud, known as, disability, we all, we have something deducted from our paychecks. Most of us, for W-2 employees definitely get, funds put away. Help us to understand, just from a 30,000 foot view, help us to understand how that works through someone's, you know, I don't want to say economic lifespan, but definitely through their lifespan generally. What are those benefits? How is one paying into them? At what point does one claim them? Who is excluded from them? Help us with that.
So I think those are all really good questions. And I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. If you start Google searching disability, you're going to get all kinds of stuff coming up. So I think it's really important that people understand that when you are working and you're talking about the paycheck, one of those things they take out is FICA. And when they take FICA out of your paycheck, yes, you are contributing to your Social Security retirement. But what is super important is to understand that you are also purchasing basically a long-term disability policy from the federal government. And it is an insurance policy. And a lot of people don't realize that that's what they're doing. And so by paying into the system and paying your taxes, you are earning what is called a quarter of coverage. And so what you need to do to have Social Security disability insurance is to be paying into earning those quarters of coverage. That's how you have the insurance. Now, what's really important that I think a lot of people don't understand is, well, first of all, if you don't pay your taxes and you don't pay into the system, you don't have this insurance coverage available. The other thing to understand is if you do become disabled and you leave the workforce, you are not paying your insurance premiums anymore. And we all know that if you stop paying your insurance premiums, you lose your insurance. And that is very true for Social Security disability insurance. If you have been working all the way up very steadily until you become disabled, you have insurance that is good for about 5 years. After that point, your insurance expires. So if you've been out of the workforce for a very long time, you more likely than not do not even have that option available to you, which is the Social Security disability insurance. If you are one of those people that takes cash under the table a lot and you're not paying your taxes, then again, you're not earning those quarters of coverage. And without that, you do not have access to Social Security disability insurance.
So Jennifer,
Now,
does that mean that, I'm sorry, does that mean that unlike your Social Security payments, that once you pay into for 40 quarters, then you are then, fully vested and you will get your money, as you choose, as you reach some retirement age? Does that mean that your disability policy is not evergreen, or at some point it does become evergreen?
it will never become evergreen. Your retirement will always be there, but your disability insurance is always going to be subject to this question of quarters of coverage. And when you stop paying in, when is it going to expire? And that's what they call it the date last insured. And so the good analogy is if you're in a car accident, if you have coverage for that month that you're in the car accident, you're good to go. But if you have a car accident the next month and you don't have coverage, they're not going to cover it. And so you have to prove that you became disabled during the period in which you have coverage. If you're having to prove it outside of that, then the only thing you have available is something called supplemental security income. And that has a whole host of rules and regulations. If you're married, you probably won't qualify because the spousal income will kick you out of that. And that's different that's called SSI. But again, it's a real concern that if you need to pay your taxes, get your quarters of coverage. If you stop working, do not sit around for 3 or 4 or 5 years thinking, well, maybe I'll go back to work and maybe I won't. Because at that point, your insurance starts to expire, and bringing forth a disability claim at that point starts to become very difficult because you're having to prove disability in the past.
And in the event that one's disability insurance at the federal level has lapsed, what other alternatives could there be? What could someone purchase? Or is it just this black hole that is not going to get filled?
It depends. I mean, could you purchase a private short or long-term disability policy? Maybe, but I think it would be prohibitively expensive. And most of the time, those private policies, so I'm talking about like Cigna and Unum and those sorts of things, are tied to an employer. Your only other alternative at that point is the supplemental security income. But the problem with that is if you're married, they're going to look at your spouse's income. They're going to look at your marital assets. They're going to look at your individual assets. And what is truly draconian about SSI, and I don't use that word lightly, is as an individual, if you have more than $2,000 in assets, you do not qualify. As a married couple, if you have more than $3,000 in assets, you do not qualify. So SSI is really only for people who are truly, truly needy and scraping the bottom of the barrel. And again, most married couples are not going to qualify. So if you've been out of work a long time, your spouse is working, and you decide you're going to apply, you're not going to qualify because your spouse's income and your marital assets will kick you out of SSI. So it is a black hole.
And speaking of things that not everyone thinks about, in the case of a divorce, can you share with us what maybe some of those limitations are as well?
Yeah, so this is something that I see very unfortunately a lot of times on the back end, and it tends to happen more to women. So a woman is working, maybe she's having some difficulties. She becomes a stay-at-home mom. She's able to make things work, but then maybe a divorce is going to happen, and she's been out of the workplace for so long, but has disabilities and isn't able to re-enter the workforce. When you go through a divorce and she comes out the other end, she's not going to have those quarters of coverage because she's been out of work for so long. The only thing that's going to be available to her is that SSI thing that I was just talking about. And when you apply for SSI, not only are they going to look at assets, but they're also going to look at income. So if she's receiving any sort of alimony or marital support post-divorce, that alimony money is probably going to prevent her from being able to apply for SSI because she's not going to qualify for it. So what I would really encourage people to do is, if you are disabled in a marriage situation and you are considering getting divorced, please talk to a Social Security disability attorney before you sign to make sure that you have a plan in place so that you're not left on the other end receiving monetary support, but then not being able to apply for disability.
Little known fact, and I think a lot of people would benefit from that given the rate of divorce in the country. And here's a question, Jennifer. Before we wrap up, if you could leave our listeners with one takeaway, what would it be?
I think my takeaway would be, first of all, the tips that I just gave, but also I want to kind of touch back on estate planning. Life is very uncertain. None of us know what's going to happen from day to day. And I want people to understand that estate planning is not for a person who has $5 million in a mansion on a hill. We all need to have a plan in place, especially if you have family members who are disabled and are dependent on government benefits like SSI and Medicaid. Please get with an estate planning attorney and get your plan together before something happens. We always like to say, if you don't have a plan, the state has one for you. And a lot of times you're not going to like the state plan. So please make sure that you realize life is uncertain and get those plans in place sooner rather than later.
Sage advice. I'd like to thank Jennifer Jarvis of Sartain Law Offices in Georgia. Jennifer, can you share with our audience your contact information?
Sure. So you can find me on the sartainlaw.com website. I also, because of my advocacy, have a website called Georgia Advocate Partners, because I'm in Georgia and I like to advocate, and this is really a partnership. I also have a YouTube channel, Georgia Advocate Partners, where I put a lot of videos out for people who are working their way through the Social Security process to help you with that.
Wonderful. This has been the Lawyers Who Care video show podcast that highlights attorneys who go above and beyond for their clients. If you're an attorney or know one who does go above and beyond, feel free to reach out to us, 914-666-6600. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.